Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast.
Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. I have an adoptee on the show today. Her name is Katie. Now, imagine being in 8th grade and being sat down and told that you were adopted. Now, just go back to when you were in 8th grade, probably one of the most awkward times in a child's life when you are really trying to just fit in, and you find out that your family has been keeping things from you your entire life. This is what happened to Katie. Now, why did her family finally tell her when she was in 8th grade? And who exactly were her biological parents? I am going to let Katie tell that story, but let me tell you a little bit more about Katie. Katie is a project manager by day and an author by night. That is when she's not being a full-time mom and wife. She channels themes of abandonment and found family into her writing as a tool for self-healing. She considers herself lucky to have so many people in her life that care about her, both adoptive and biological. She is an advocate for mental health as a survivor of it herself. Here is my interview with Katie. We are welcoming Katie to the show today. Hi, Katie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. So tell us what the circumstances were of your adoption. I know there's kind of a unique family dynamic going on there. So tell us what you know.
Yeah, so my mom was in high school when she had me, my biological mom, I should say. She was in a bad situation at her home, and so she kind of ran away from the person that was raising her and went to my parents' house. And I say parents as the people that adopted me because I call them mom and dad. So then my bio mom ran away to their house, and they're actually her aunt and uncle.
So she ran
So it's
away
a
to her biological aunt and uncle's house.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And you
So
said they
she
became your parents, your aunt and
yes,
uncle.
and my aunt and uncle became my parents. Yeah.
Okay. So what happened there? How did that happen?
So she, basically was worried for my safety since she wasn't in a safe home. Um, and they took her in, and her boyfriend, my bio dad at the time, they had a teenage relationship, you know, um, very much on again, off again kind of thing. And yeah, from what I know, he really wanted to keep me. But then as they discussed it more, they were like, we're two teenagers, we're not ready to raise a kid. And this was, back in 1984. So things were a little different back then, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Were they both, how old was your bio dad?
he was 17, I think, at the time, probably 18 by the time I was born, because the way his birthday falls. But
Mhm.
he was a senior, I believe, and she was a junior. So after she had me in July, she had to finish out her senior year of high school still, whereas he would have graduated.
Okay. So they decided that they weren't going to be able to keep you. And so how did
Mhm.
your aunt and uncle end up adopting you?
Well, basically, once she decided that she didn't want to keep me, so she actually had given birth to me, um, and she was still living with my mom and dad, aunt and uncle, and they had two kids already that were around my mom's age. So I have older siblings. Um, and she was like, I just need to finish school. I don't think I can be a mom right now. And so they were like, well, we will take her. Like, we are happy to adopt her and give her a good life. And that's kind of what they told my bio dad as well, from what I've gathered, is that, he was very reluctant to sign over the papers for the adoption. He really thought they could try to give it a go. And then, like I said, as they talked it out a little bit more, they decided it probably wasn't a good idea. But my parents told him, this is the life we can give her. Um, and they tried to reassure him as much as possible that I would have the best life possible if he would just sign the papers, kind of thing.
And were they kind of not wanting him around after they adopted you?
No,
That's kind of
they
what it
didn't.
sounded like. So
I
it
know.
wasn't going to be kind of an open adoption where he could come see you, and it's like they
No.
wanted you as their child. And but what about your bio mom? Was she allowed to come see you and stuff?
Yeah, so this is kind of where it gets sketchy. And the thing is like I've got three different stories, right? I've got my parents' story, and then I have my bio mom story, and I have my bio dad story. And so from what I've pieced together, it sounds like um, he was the one that put up a fight, and then he reluctantly agreed to it. My parents told him that he would still be able to come over and see me and be a part of my life until the papers were signed. And once the papers were signed, it was, if you try to come over here, we will call the police.
Oh, wow.
From what I've gathered. Now, this is from his side of the family telling me this. I don't know if that's what happened on my
Yeah.
parents' side. They told me that basically when they adopted me, that I was theirs. They were going to raise me as theirs, and they didn't really want outside influences coming in. Is kind of how they put it. And my bio mom is still, she was a part of my life because they were her legal guardian for a time, since she
Okay.
did have the bad home life. So they became her legal guardian for a while. And
So
they
you
tried to,
two lived together then?
we did, we lived. So that's also the strange part. She was living at my parents' house when she gave birth to me. And then for 6 months, she was trying to raise me in this house with my parents and my older siblings. Um, and then, yeah, when she, was like, I can't do this, and they're like, we will adopt her. It kind of became this weird dynamic of her still being in the house and then my parents trying to raise me and trying to make some kind of harmony from that.
Right.
She had to finish out high school still. So as far as I know, she lived at the house until she finished high school, or until she got married, I think even.
Wow.
So
So
yeah.
did your mom and dad not adopt you until you were 6 months old then? Till your mom?
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
right. They didn't adopt me until I was about 6 months old. So my name that was given to me was Brooke Suzanne when I was born. And that was on the birth certificate until I was adopted. And then my dad was like, if we're going to adopt her, I want to give her a good Catholic name. And so they
Oh,
settled
wow.
on settled on a new name for me. And then the birth certificate was updated, and they were listed as my parents instead of my biological mom and dad. And
So
history was erased.
your mom tried to raise you for 6 months though, and
Mhm.
was that means that your bio dad didn't sign the papers either until you were 6 months old? Is that right?
That's
That's
right.
when all that
Yep.
happened.
Yep.
Okay. And how did you find out you were adopted? I mean, did you know that this person was your biological mom, or how did that all play
Mm-mm.
out?
They like my parents never wanted me to know. I don't think. I don't think they would have ever told me.
That you were adopted, period.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was not in their plans. Even with my bio mom like still living
That's
there,
so crazy, right? Like how are they planning to do that? I don't know.
Yeah, so when they adopted me, they had two other children of their own. Like, so I have younger siblings too, because they were like, we don't want to raise you as an only child. So
Wow.
it was kind of like it was like a family, right? I mean, we had the two older siblings and the two younger siblings, and me in the middle. Um, and nobody would have questioned it because I look a lot like them. Obviously, we're related. And the only reason that they told me is because someone in our small town started talking.
Oh
And
boy.
so my friends in, I think I was in eighth grade at the time, they were finding out. And so my parents were afraid that one of my friends were going to tell me that I was adopted. And then I would have all these questions and I would come to them. And it's like, do we deny it and just keep the covers
Yeah.
drawn? Or do we admit it and tell her? And so that's what they ended up doing, is they decided it was probably best to tell me the truth.
So you heard it from them and not somebody else.
I did.
And how did that go?
It was a lot. I mean, so I'm in eighth grade and they're like, we're having a family meeting, right? And they sent my two younger siblings away. And I was nervous. I was like, my God, they're going to talk to me about starting high school next year, like this is a big deal. Um, and that's not what it was at all. So I was completely blindsided. I mean, I had no clue, like just zero inkling.
Because the older
Um,
siblings probably knew, right? Because
they did. Yeah,
so they were
they
in
knew.
the conversation with your
Yeah.
parents. Okay.
So it's my parents, my older siblings, and my bio mom were all there. And then when they told me, I just didn't believe it. I was like, "You're joking. Like this is really funny." Like I was like, "Okay, like
Yeah.
joke's over. What do you really want me here for?" And then their faces, they were just like stone and like crying. And I was like, "Oh shit, like this is
Yeah.
real."
Oh my
So then
goodness.
I started crying and I was like, "I don't understand." Like I was so confused and my bio mom was there like trying to hold my hand and stuff, and I did
Oh
have a
boy.
relationship with her, because she was part of the family, so she had always treated me kind of special. I felt like she would take me like shopping sometimes, and we just kind of considered her like an aunt kind of role,
Hmm.
or a sibling, just she just had this special role in our family. So I didn't really think anything about it because she did the same thing for my other siblings too. I just felt like maybe she was a little bit nicer to me or something. And so she was there and trying to tell me, but at the time, you know, they told me, and I had questions obviously, but not, I didn't know what to think. I was processing it. And it's hard. My family is kind of a we don't ask a lot of questions kind of thing. We just know we love each other kind of thing. And we're not really good at sharing our feelings sometimes. But
Hmm.
I did, like, later on, I was like, well, I want to know about my dad now. I want to know about my bio dad. And that's kind of the natural progression. They didn't tell me anything about him when they told me I was adopted. They just said, she, my bio mom got pregnant. He's not in the picture, obviously. And that's that. I mean,
Hmm.
they wouldn't answer any questions about him, just that they had met in high school. And so, like, a few weeks, maybe even down the road, I tried to ask my mom, "Who's my bio dad? I want to know. I'm curious." And she literally slammed the door in my face.
What?
Yeah, she wasn't ready to have that conversation. She's like, I was hers. She didn't. She just wasn't ready. I don't
Wow.
think. I think it. Like I said, I don't think they ever wanted me to find out.
Yeah.
And then they left it up to me as to whether or not I wanted to tell my younger siblings. And at the time, I decided not to. I was like, this is too much for me to handle.
Yeah.
I can't tell anybody else right now. I don't know how to handle it. And I don't want them to treat me differently.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean,
Mhm.
but eventually they did find out, right? I mean,
Eventually, I told them. So through some sleuthing with one of my friends, we kind of put some clues together. So my bio mom had given me just like a few clues about who my bio dad was because she didn't want to tell me either. And it's not that he's a bad guy. She just didn't want to go against my mom's wishes.
mhm.
She had fully given control of my raising to them. And so she's like, well, if they're not going to tell you if they're not ready, then I don't feel like it's my place, kind of thing. So she gave me some hints. And through that and a little yearbook digging at the library, I discovered who he was. And I knew because I looked so much like him.
Wow.
I was like, I know that's him. Like, that's just. So once I found out who he was, I took the initiative to meet him. And once I did that, I was like, I'm kind of opening the floodgates here. I feel like I need to tell my younger siblings at this point. Like, if this is something I'm going to pursue, I don't want to live this double life
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
I want them to understand. So I ended up telling them. And what's
That's,
funny is I actually wrote a passage in my diary, like, eighth grade, you had
yeah.
diary back then.
Yeah.
I wrote all about how they told me I was adopted and that this person was
Oh,
my mom, and my sister read it because that's what sisters do. And
your little sister?
she asked me, yes,
Oh boy.
and she read it. And so at the time I denied it back then. But then, when I finally told them, she was like, "You were lying when you said that wasn't true when I read it in your diary."
Oh
And I'm
my
like,
gosh. You got put in the middle of
oh,
so much stuff.
I did.
Because, like you just said,
Yeah.
no one was ready for you to know, but you were ready to know. So how
Yes.
was that? Like, did that affect your relationships with your parents and your bio mom? that number one, they kept this from you all this time, and now they're still kind of controlling the information from you.
Yeah, it was hard. It was, I mean, my older sister saw a change in me, you know.
Yeah.
I did become, I mean, I became a little rebellious like later on, like a few years down the road, even. Like, I didn't really have a lot of time to process it because nobody wanted to talk about it. My friends didn't want to talk about it. My parents didn't want to talk about it. Like, my bio mom wouldn't talk to me about
Mhm.
it. So it wasn't until high school where I really started just kind of doing things on my own, you know? It's like that's where you kind of do a little self-discovery anyway. Um, you know, and I knew that I had other siblings out there. So I had actually discovered that my bio dad had other children. And my bio mom had a child as well. So I've got all this stuff going on, right? And I knew that his kids were about my age. And so I was like, what if I start dating one of them and nobody
Exactly.
tells me? You know, like this is a
Yes.
small town. Nobody wants to talk to me about it. If I were to meet one of them, would they tell me? Like I would have to, right? So why not just tell me now? So yeah, it was it was very difficult. So until I like actively started thinking about it, then I that's where kind of the constraints came in the relationships. I feel like my bio mom really wanted to be there for me and she did the best she could. And so I became a little bit closer to her just because she was the only one who was willing to give me something,
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And I could go over to her house whenever I wanted. And I actually started babysitting my half sister, her daughter. And so that felt, you know, that was kind of nice. You know, I was like, okay, like I can come over there as a safe place to talk about it. With my parents, I became a little rebellious, and it wasn't really until my senior year, I got a little freedom. I met some new people, people who were willing to talk about things, you know, like I just, we live in such a community where people just don't
Yeah.
talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, so when I did, I did. And then my sister was the one who noticed the change. My older sister, like I said, she was like, you just kind of went wild for a little bit. You know, you used to be this super sweet kid, like kind of always did what you were told kind of thing. And then she's like, I don't know, you just changed. And I was like, well, kind of feel like that was for the better to a certain extent because I
Well,
needed to
because
figure this out.
you did change. Who you thought you were wasn't who you were, right? So
Exactly.
you
It
did
was a huge
change.
thing.
Yeah. Huge.
Yeah, it wasn't like just some, you
Right.
know, simple thing like, oh, here's a new car. No, it was your whole life was a lie.
Yeah.
And we're not going to tell you anything else. I'm really sorry. You just have to continue as normal.
Yeah.
That was the hardest part. They just wanted everything to stay the same way. They just wanted to stay the
Right.
same. They didn't want it to change. And me asking questions was threatening that, I think.
Yep. And it just feels like everybody else is considering everybody else's feelings, which happens in it seems like every adoption story, but they're not considering your feelings and how you feel about any of this,
Yeah.
and that just makes me so angry. I don't know how I would do carrying forward a relationship with that if that happened to me. The trust would
Mhm.
be like so it would be tough. Um, and so you, as a teenager later in life, kind of changed. And what did that look like? What were you rebelling? What did the rebellion look like?
And I don't think it was anything bad.
Horrible, right?
Uh, I mean,
Normal teenage stuff.
it was normal teenage stuff. Like everybody used to just call me like a really good kid, and they could always trust me, and they could always count on me, and I was very responsible for my age, and you know, I just had a lot put on my shoulders, and so when I think before my senior year, I started like working as a lifeguard at the public school or at the public pool.
Mhm.
So I went to private school, which was another thing. And so when I started hanging out with the public school kids who like, you know, they hadn't it was a different experience. And I don't want to say it's
Mhm.
like public versus private, but
Right.
it really was like the group of people were just different from the
Different.
ones that I had hung out with.
Yeah.
And so I saw them as having more freedom. I loved, they were just the greatest people, right? They would just talk about anything and everything. I felt like I could be myself. I felt like I could
Mm.
be this wild person. I felt like I could like tell them what was going on in my life, and they'd be like, that's okay. Like, we're still your friends.
Wow.
Whereas before, I felt like if I talked about anything, then I was just weird and I was inconvenient, like it was
Yes.
just the
You were
difference
causing
of
trouble.
I was
Don't
causing
talk
trouble
about
if I
that.
tried to ask questions, and then I found this group of people who were like, yeah, that's totally fine. Like, we were all going through some stuff. Let's go through it together, and I was like,
Wow.
wow.
That's
And so
huge.
I started staying out late. I didn't come home at curfew sometimes. I started seeing this guy who they didn't like, my parents. My mom, I think, was just so afraid that I would repeat my
Hmm.
bio mom's mistake. Not a mistake. I don't say I'm a mistake, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's how they viewed it.
Right.
She didn't want me to go down the same path of like finding this guy who they didn't see as a good person and maybe getting pregnant, God forbid, like,
Right.
right? But yeah, so I just kind of started challenging them. That's the person I became. I started challenging them and I started challenging the norm. I started questioning things and they didn't like that. And
Mm.
the townspeople didn't like it because they would call my parents if they saw me out and about.
Oh,
They're like,
wow.
hey, your daughter is with this guy or hanging out with this group of people. And I would get home and I would get a lecture and I would be grounded. And
And it just
they
made
thought
you
I
want
was
to
just
stay out
going
longer
crazy.
and not come home,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, they thought I was turning into this bad kid and I wasn't. I got so tired of just living in the norm and like not questioning anything and just doing what I was told. Like I needed to have a conversation with somebody and nobody wanted to have it.
Right. Right. So did you end up meeting your biological dad then at some point?
I did. I did. And that's kind of a crazy story too, because I had planned on it. Like I had not really planned it. I had thought about it for a long time. And so by this time, I graduated high school and I think I was a freshman maybe in college or a sophomore. Maybe I was a sophomore at that point. I couldn't remember. I was like 19, 18 or 19. And the thing is the town we lived in is so small. Um, and everybody kind of knew everybody. So my younger sister is a year younger than I am. So we kind of hung out with some of the same people um, there for a while. So I went to a house party. That's what you did back in those days. And I kind of knew this guy um, was I knew he was related to my bio dad somehow, but I wasn't really sure how kind of thing. Someone had just told me and by that time I had started to basically gather this a lot of information, right? All of this knowledge about him, about who his kids were, about who like, just that life. So I'm at a house party and this guy comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, I'm your brother, right?"
Just
I'm
like
like,
that.
"I'm sorry?" Yeah, just like that. And I was like, I knew I was related to you somehow, but I wasn't really sure how." He's like, "Yeah, and your other brother is here too. Do you want to go meet him?"
Oh
And I was
my
like,
gosh.
"Sure, okay." So, and it's at this house that I had been to. I can't even tell you how many times. Like, it was my sister's boyfriend at the time,
Oh my
and
God.
so I had been to his house multiple times, and they all hung out together. They all knew who each other were. Um, but for some reason, this was the night that we all came together. So I
How did
go and
your half brothers know about you?
my bio dad talked about me to them.
Okay.
Yeah, like that. That was like, from what I understand from their side of things, is giving me up for adoption was he felt one of the biggest regrets in his life.
Mm,
So he always talked about me. They knew who I was.
wow.
Um, they would know who I was in public. Like I would be at a baseball game or I would be playing softball. They would know who I was, and I would not know who they were because we all played the same sports. It was all the same crowd. Like it
Oh
was
my
hard.
goodness. I just wonder how your parents thought they were gonna hide that from you, especially in this small little town, and how that was gonna work. But wow, so they
Well,
knew you and they didn't say anything all this
mm-mm.
time until you were older.
Yeah, my bio dad asked them not to. Basically said that, you know, he had given up that part of his life and he wanted me to have a good life. And he felt like if he was a part of it, that it would be like ruining the facade. I don't know. He didn't want to he didn't want to step into my life and make things complicated or difficult.
Yeah.
That's what I gathered. Anyway.
So you did meet him then at some
Mm.
point?
So at the party that night where I met my brothers, they were like, "Hey, he is moving soon.
Oh,
Like he lives in this town now, but he's going to be moving. So if this is something you really want to do, here's his address." And I was like, "Great." So, like spur of the
my
moment.
goodness.
And the other thing is, yes, my cousin who I grew up with lived across the street from him. So I would go to my cousin's house and I'd be like, "I'm thinking about going across the street. Like, what do you know about this guy?" And he's like, "Oh, he's a great guy. I talk to him all the time. Like, good person to have a drink with or whatever." And I'm like, "Okay." Like, and I was like, "Do you want to come with me?" kind of thing. And he's like, "Really think you should do this by yourself?" And I'm like, "Okay." So I would go to my cousin's house a couple of times before I finally got the nerve to just walk up to his door and knock on it. And the minute I knocked on the door, his wife answered, and she knew who exactly who I was. She was like, "Hi." And I was like, "Hi, my name's Katie. Um, I'm his daughter." And she's like, "I know who you are." She's like, "Hold on, I'll go get him."
Wow.
And that's how it happened. Like she went and got in and he came to the door and he let me in and lots of tears and we had a big conversation. I actually so from the party that night, my brother had gotten in a lot of trouble because he was out late and they were he's going to ground him or whatever. I got him out of trouble. I was like, "So, like I know he was late, but this is why. Like maybe you shouldn't ground him." And
Yeah.
it was really funny. But he called
It
his
sounds like you
sister.
felt like you could talk to your dad though about.
I did. I don't know what it was. It was easy. We just
Mhm.
sat down, we had a conversation. They wanted to know all about me, what I was doing. Like, yeah, he called his sister and she came over and I mean, she's got the biggest heart of anyone I know. She was crying and wanted hugs and we took pictures together and um they wanted to tell me all about their family, about their parents and who were my biological grandparents and they just wanted me to be a part of their life. And they
Yeah.
basically left it up to me as to what I wanted to do. And of course, I was curious. I wanted to know everything.
Right.
I wanted to see what that life was like, and I wanted to keep in contact. So we all exchanged phone numbers.
So how did reunion go and how did you compartmentalize? I mean, did you call him dad? Did you call him by his first name? And same thing with your bio mom. How did they fit into your life?
So I always just call them by their name. Um, it's Mike and Tanya. I don't know if that matters, but that's just I don't see them as my parents. They didn't raise me. Uh, I just it's just it's one of those weird things. I don't know. I have a really good relationship with my parents now. And I feel like calling them my bio parents, mom or dad, just it doesn't feel right to me. Like
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
they gave me life and they're the reason I'm here. It's just that's not what I consider a parent to be. You know,
Hmm.
they're
Yeah.
not the ones who gave me all the love in the world and gave me everything I had in life and continue to support me, I know they want to and I know they would have, but at the same time, it's just like
Yeah.
um
So
I
there's
struggle with that.
yeah. So there's a lot of adoptees out there that say that they feel the child should be placed with biological family if possible. Then they think that would alleviate like a lot of the adoption trauma.
Mhm.
So what would you say are the pros and cons of being placed in the biological family?
Mm. That's a tough call. Um,
Do you think it's better or no?
I can't say that it is or isn't. I mean, from my experience, it was better that I was with the people who adopted me. You know, for me, I had a really good experience being adopted. I had a really good life. I had siblings that I can count on. I mean, I'd be lost without those people. Like they are just my whole heart.
Yeah.
Um, and then after meeting, my biological family, I still love them, but I love them at a distance. I integrated myself into their life for a few years and it was messy. And, they just, I I lived a lifestyle with them for a certain amount of time. And then it's like I pulled back. was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know who I am. I had a very big identity crisis.
Yeah.
I just didn't know where to be. I wasn't sure where to be at anymore. But my safety net was the family that raised me. So I can't really say for sure because in my experience, I was happier with the people that raised me versus these people that I just met, didn't spend my whole life with, didn't know their history. I saw like a small part of that.
Do
And
you
I,
think
you know,
do you think being raised with biological family because you saw some of that mirroring, um, do you think that alleviated some of the trauma that adoptees feel?
maybe, but since my family never liked to talk about it, I don't know. It all came as a shock still.
Yeah.
Um, and then I found out that, my bio mom, Tanya, her mom had kind of given her up too. So she had kind of
Mm,
abandoned her when she was younger. So it's like it was still messy no matter what. Um,
yeah. Was it messy on your
I
dad's
don't know.
side as well? I mean, was there like a honeymoon period and then
Yeah, it was.
awkward stuff?
Yeah, basically. There was a time where I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to know all about him, so I would call him like weekly. I was in college at the time, so I was also just figuring myself out too. Um, and he was always very polite. It was always, he wanted to be a part of my life as much as I would let him.
Hmm.
But again, he just stayed very reserved, very, I don't know, just, he kind of just took a back seat. He was there when I invited him in, and when I shut it down, then he pulled back.
Yeah.
Um, he really wanted to be, but he was just very respectful.
And so you had two brothers from him. Any other siblings? Just the two brothers?
So he had two sons of his own, and he also adopted one of his previous wife's son. So I know all three of them, and then my bio mom has a daughter, and so I
Okay.
was I was raised around her though. Like
Hmm.
when I found out that I was adopted, she was told that I was her half sister.
Okay. So how
So
are
it
the
was,
relationships with the siblings?
um, they're, I mean, they are what they are. I can count on them, like I can talk to them, um, but we're not really that close.
Yeah. It's hard to get that. I feel the same way with mine. I talk to them and have a relationship, but it doesn't feel like that sibling bond like when you grow up with
Hmm.
somebody. So I get
Yeah.
that. So do you ever consider yourself in the adoption fog?
I'm not really sure what the adoption fog means. I think I looked it up one time, but I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, it's just kind of, realizing that it has affected your life being adopted and all the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that comes with it. And then once you start realizing, oh, maybe I do this because of that, you know. So it's just kind
Hmm.
of some realizations basically of having the primal wound and kind of just coming to terms
Hmm.
with that stuff. I feel like you kind of were coming out of it at eighth grade. I mean,
Yeah,
kind of,
right.
or maybe
Or
you went
going
in at
into
that
it.
point. Maybe you went into it at
Yeah,
that point. That's
I
true.
I would say it's definitely there. The sense of abandonment is huge.
Yeah.
Um, I just have a lot of abandonment issues, and I'm sure it stems from that. Um, I don't know. And then, my bio dad took his own life a few years ago. It was
Mm.
two, maybe even three at this point.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so that was a huge blow.
Yeah.
Because I maintained a relationship, but it wasn't like a close one, like I said. And I never really knew how to have a relationship with him because my bio mom was in my life. Like I knew how to talk to her, but I didn't know how to talk to him. And so I was very angry at him
Hmm.
for like removing himself from my life. And I felt guilty about being angry about that,
Yeah.
because it's like he didn't raise me and I didn't want him in my life to be as a father figure. And now I'm mad at him for doing what he did, kind of thing. So it was very, when that happened, it really shook me a little bit. And I think I went back into the adoption fog
Yeah.
because I was mourning, but I was also mourning for my brothers because they had lost their father who had raised them and who was a part of their life. And then I felt guilty for mourning a person I felt like I barely knew. And
Yeah,
then I had all these questions that I was never going to get answers to.
right. You
So
feel
I don't
like,
know.
I mean, for me, I always felt like, do I have a right to feel anything towards this person? Because,
Yeah.
they were not my parent, but they're my biological parent. And when my biological dad passed, I didn't find out till like 3 months later. My sister didn't tell me.
Mm,
And she said that he didn't want me to be there. And
mm,
that's a whole other story. But I kind of
yeah.
felt like did I really have a right to be there? You start thinking
Yeah.
those things. And even though I probably would have wanted to, that was
Yeah.
kind of taken away from me. And that was kind of disheartening as well. I
That's
didn't
hard.
even get the choice. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That
do
is
you,
hard. And with them, they did want me there.
yeah. Yeah. So do you think that people can heal from adoption trauma, from the primal wound? Do you think it's possible to heal?
I think it's possible. But everyone heals at their own pace. I do think it's good to seek somebody out. Um, I went to therapy for depression and anxiety and all that, which runs very heavily on both sides of my biological family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we did talk about adoption, and I just, after he took his life, I feel like I'm right back to having that wound open again. So I'm going to start therapy again
Yeah,
and try to work on it. I think it's possible to heal from it, but honestly, like part of me, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I just it always comes back to abandonment for me. When people in my life just kind of up and leave or stop talking to me, it's very hurtful, and I feel like it just reopens that wound
yeah,
of feeling like I'm abandoned,
yeah,
even though you know, from what I've gathered, it sounds like it was the right decision, but it doesn't, the right decision for them. Maybe it wasn't the
exactly.
right decision for me.
Right,
We don't know that. I'm never going to know that. I'm never going to know what my life was like. And even though I love the life I had, I still wonder.
right. Yeah. And then that, kind of reinforces that abandonment, when your dad, did what he did and opens that whole thing up again too, is
Mhm.
that abandonment wound. That's huge. So you went to therapy and that helped. Anything else that has helped you cope with the adoption trauma?
Mm. Just trying to keep open conversations with my bio parents. Um, I mean, I can ask my bio mom questions now. Obviously, I can't ask him, but I don't know. I mean, for me, I felt like it got really messy when I met his family and when I tried to integrate myself into their lives. Um, so I think it's just a matter of figuring it all out for yourself. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think as adopted people, we're always curious, especially about blood relatives. And if we didn't have a good experience with people that raised us, like, of course, that's going to be a lot harder. Um, but I don't know what else to help. Therapy is what helped for me.
Good. Yeah.
And yeah, just having a really supportive, I have a supportive spouse and I have a son, and like I just kind of draw on my own experiences and think like, now that I have a child, I know I'm making the best decisions I can for him. I just
Mhm.
have to imagine that they were making the best decisions they could for them, and I have to forgive them.
Yeah.
I have to work on forgiveness.
We all do what we think is right, as
Mhm.
parents. We're not,
Yeah.
no parent's perfect.
No.
So, in closing, what would you like struggling adoptees to know?
Gosh, that's hard. Um, I think just something that I wish I would have probably grasped a little bit sooner is to just love who you are. Um, because I think as adopted people, we question our place in this life, and we question, um, who we are as people and where we fit in. Because I mean, when you know you're adopted, you just kind of feel, for me personally, I felt like I was adrift. I felt like I didn't know where I belonged anymore. I was very lost, and I kind of became who everybody wanted me to be for such a long time. So I think if we could just, as adopted people, just understand that we are okay and that we are perfect the way we are. And just because our parents decided they didn't want us anymore, that is not our fault.
Yeah.
Like, love yourself, believe in yourself, know that it's not your fault. I wish I would have understood that a lot sooner. And I feel like I could have healed a few things a little bit easier than having
Yeah.
to relearn all of these same lessons.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thank
Yeah.
you for coming on today and sharing your story. I
Yeah.
know I haven't had anybody on the show with a story like yours, and I just know that it's going to resonate with so many people out there, and and help them not feel so alone. So thank you so much for coming on today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This was very healing, I think.
Good. I had so many emotions and thoughts as I listened to Katie's story, as I'm sure you did as well. She really is a true survivor. She is able to tell her story in an honest and healthy way and speak truth to her journey and what she's gone through, but at the same time is able to look at others and see where they're coming from, and that it wasn't something personal that they were doing to her, that even though it was hurtful in the end, that was not their intention. And she has that compassion for her parents, who are her adoptive parents, that she considers mom and dad. And she sees that they were just trying to do what's best for her. It doesn't negate what she's been through or how she's feeling now and those abandonment issues that she's talking about. Those things are going to be lurking every once in a while when things come up in her life. But she looks at it and comes at it in such a helpful and hopeful way. And how else could you effectively deal with a story like that, but to have some compassion towards yourself and the others that were involved? I'm sure there's some anger and sadness and grief mixed in there as well. That's only normal for what she's gone through. But those things are not her focus. Her focus is on what she has, the family that she does have, the family that she is now raising, going to therapy when she needs it, and her writing that seems to be healing for her. All those things are part of her healing combination. And I hope that if you have a similar story to Katie's, that just listening today has been part of your healing combination as well. And if you would like to be part of someone else's healing combination and want to tell your story, please email me at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com, and I will send you the information to be on the show. We need to continue to educate the world about adoption. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.